One of the games I was really looking forward to in the month of February for the Nintendo Switch was Darksiders Genesis. Now, playing Darksiders 1 and 2, I really enjoyed these sort of Legend of Zelda style action-adventure games. I never got around to playing Darksiders 3, but I know that they definitely changed up the formula. Well, Darksiders Genesis is an offshoot game within the Darksiders universe, and once again changes up the formula again, instead more being like a Diablo style game. So I was definitely interested in it, along with the multiplayer aspects of the game as well. Well, I ended up getting a review copy of Darksiders Genesis for the Nintendo Switch. I played and beat it, and there are definitely some things I want to talk about with this game. So should you buy Darksiders Genesis on the Nintendo Switch? That's what we're going to find out in today's video. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But without any further ado, let's jump into the world of Darksiders Genesis for the Nintendo Switch and see if it's a game that you'll want to add to your collection. Now, like I said, Darksiders Genesis takes place within the Darksiders universe and features the main protagonist from the previous games, War, who is now joined by a new character called Strife, who is seen in previous Darksiders games but hasn't been playable until now. War and Strife are tasked with taking down Lucifer, who has been giving power to various demon entities in various stages of hell, and they must team up together to take down these entities and basically figure out why Lucifer is doing what he is doing. The game actually takes place before the events of Darksiders 1, so it helps fill in some of the backstory of how things came to be within the Darksiders universe. I thought the story in the game was fine. It had a few twists and turns, and the writing and dialogue between War and Strife was actually pretty entertaining at times. Now, War is obviously a more serious character, where Strife has lots of little jokes and tries to get War to sort of warm up a bit as a character. Some of the lines that Strife uses are a bit cheesy, but for the most part, I enjoyed the dynamic between these two characters. One thing I wasn't too big of a fan though was the way that the cutscenes in the game work. They use a comic book style, and I mean, it looks fine, but it was just kind of boring for me, and really, it just didn't appeal to me all that much. I'm sure some people will like it though, so it's definitely down to just sort of personal preference. Now, like I said, Darksiders Genesis is a very different game from the previous games within the Darksiders universe, and the main thing that boils down to is the gameplay within Darksiders Genesis. Instead of being a more Zelda-esque action-adventure game, it's a top-down Diablo-style game. When you're playing in single-player mode, you control both War and Strife, and you can switch characters on the fly. And honestly, each character plays very differently. War is a swordsman first and foremost, so he is by default a bit stronger than Strife. Now, while Strife does have melee attacks, his main difference is the introduction of gunplay. This allows for more long-range attacks and actually adds a good layer of strategy to the game, as I felt that some enemies were better suited for either War or Strife, and it was fun to figure out which character I should use against which enemy to take them down in the easiest way and fastest way possible. Now, both characters do have standard and strong attacks as well, but War has the ability to block while Strife doesn't, so there's definitely some give and take between the characters. When you weaken enemies to a certain point, the game will prompt you to press the A button, which will then allow you to do a very stylish kill. At a certain point in the game, you also get a super attack known as Wrath. Wrath will allow either War or Strife to transform into a super creature that does these huge monstrous attacks that just look absolutely fantastic. You build up this meter by defeating enemies and collecting small yellow cores that they drop, and it can really change the tide of battle. Overall, the combat in the game is pretty satisfying, and the enemy variety in the game is really well done as well. Most of the boss battles are very creative and a lot of fun, with Chapter 10 probably being my favorite boss battle in the game, as it was pretty unique, standing out amongst the other boss battles you encounter. Now, of course, the game would be a little bit boring if you couldn't do things like upgrade your characters in this game, but thankfully Darksiders Genesis has a pretty deep layer of customization for both War and Strife. As you progress throughout the game, you acquire souls from defeating enemies, which is the main form of currency in the game. Along with this currency are something called Boatman coins, which is a secondary form of currency, which are usually hidden throughout the levels in the game. These two things will allow you to access various characters in the game, which will then allow you to upgrade both your characters and your movesets. You could purchase things like the ability to hold more potions, more powerful attacks for each character, War and Strife, and even ammunition changes for Strife that really make the game feel very different. On top of all that is the creature core system. As you defeat enemies in the game, sometimes they will drop their cores. These cores can then be used on a creature core menu, which is essentially the in-game skill tree system. You can upgrade both Strife and War at the same time with things like overall stats on attack, health, and wrath. You can also level up these cores by defeating the same enemies over and over again, as collecting the same core of an enemy will allow you to level it up, making it even stronger. You can also unlock creature cores pretty quickly in the arena mode in the game, which has you taking down 10 waves of enemies in the fastest time you can for various unlocks. The arena mode is separate and something that you have to unlock in the game, but it was definitely fun to sort of check this out. Now, aside from all the standard combat you encounter in the game, there are also some puzzle elements and platforming elements mixed in as well. The puzzle elements are usually pretty straightforward, but a few of them did require some outside of the box thinking. Platforming segments include jumping across gaps and areas, swinging from hanging platforms, and shimmying across various platforms. The platforming can feel a tad bit loose at times, but for the most part, I had no major issues with it. And honestly, I kind of enjoyed the puzzle elements, as some of them were kind of like aha moments. When you finally figure it out, you felt very satisfied. So far so good. Everything seems to be going well. You can upgrade your characters, the combat is very fun and satisfying, and of course being able to upgrade the combat as you play throughout the game as well definitely keeps things fresh. So what are the flaws with Darksiders Genesis? What are the problems with the game? Well, there are quite a few, so let's go ahead and get into them. One of my major problems with this game is the map system. Now, each level has its own map, and by basically just exploring the areas you could find the map for the level. The problem is when you pull up the map to see where you are, it just shows you the general vicinity you're in, not an actual icon to show you where you are on the map. It's very strange, it's very confusing as well, as sometimes you won't know where you are exactly on the map because there's no indication of where you are on the map, just a general area. I'm not quite sure why they decided to do this. Now, another thing I haven't talked about yet is the multiplayer in the game. Darksiders Genesis allows for local and online co-op, where one character is Strife and one character is War. People kept joining me in my game, but the way it works is, well, really weird. The joining character has to be at the same point or beyond you in the story, or else they will just sit in your lobby until they decide to leave without the ability to boot them. Then, if someone does join your game and is in the same story mission as you or has beaten it previously, in order for them to actually join you in the game while you're playing, you have to go to a summoning crystal in the level that you are in. Now, some levels have these summoning crystals pretty close by, but some of these levels that you play are absolutely massive and the summoning crystals are nowhere near you. So in order to get to a summoning crystal, you have to remember where it is and then backtrack or forward track in order to get to that crystal. And a lot of times by the time you get to the crystal, the other person will have already left. The game also adjusts for when people join your game by adding in more characters and enemies to fight in the levels as well. So if somebody joins your game and then actually leaves the game mid-battle, you actually have to go back to a summoning crystal so that the game can readjust it back to single player mode. It's just absolutely cumbersome and ridiculous. I'm not quite sure why they didn't go with a simple drop in and drop out mechanic, because the way it works now is just not very good. Now, you can always start up a game and play with your friends at the start of the level and it's no big problem, but the whole random system just doesn't work very well, and it was honestly something I was kind of looking forward to checking out. Another thing we haven't talked about in this game yet are the graphics, and graphically speaking, Darksiders Genesis is definitely a mixed bag on the Nintendo Switch. Now, most of the environments and enemies I think look pretty good, but there are some areas that definitely stick out more than others. Eden, for instance, looks absolutely fantastic, with a lot of cool stuff going on in the levels, a lot of cool lighting effects, and of course water flowing all over the place. It just looks great. But then there's other areas you go into, and they're just kind of boring and drab. The main issue with Darksiders Genesis graphics, though, is the frame rate, which is honestly all over the place at times. For the most part, the game runs at what seems to be like 30 frames per second, but sometimes the frame rate will dip much lower. Now, the strange thing about this is it's not necessarily indicative of like too many enemies on the screen or too much action on the screen. It literally just happens at weird points in the game, including when nothing is happening at all. I found Chapter 8 to be the biggest culprit of the frame rate dips personally, and I just couldn't figure out why the game was struggling so much at these points of the game. Now, that's not to say the game looks horrible or anything like that, and it's definitely more than playable, but it was disappointing to see all these issues arising in the game from the graphical standpoint. And finally, I encountered some weird glitches from time to time in the game as well. When putting the system from handheld mode into dock mode in order to capture some footage, for some reason the menu system didn't adjust to the change and was cropped off until I finished the chapter that I was in. I also had the game freeze on me a couple times as well, requiring me to reboot the system, and I'm not really quite sure why it happened. I wasn't able to replicate it, it would just freeze on me. Darksiders Genesis features 16 chapters and took me about 13 or so hours to complete, not finishing all the arena modes. There are also various unlockable quests in the game and multiple difficulties as well, and the ability to play the game with a friend or a random does add some additional replay value. Some of the levels, like I said, are rather big, and you aren't going to see everything within these levels in just one playthrough of the level. There's also a touch of Metroidvania style stuff as well, with some areas not being accessible until you have certain abilities that you have unlocked by playing throughout the game, which does encourage you to go back and check out these levels once again. And on top of all that, the game is only a $40 game, so I feel like content-wise, you're getting a decent amount for your buck. So should you buy Darksiders Genesis on the Nintendo Switch? Well, I think it depends. I think at its core, Darksiders Genesis is honestly a good game, but I feel like it probably plays better on the PS4 or the Xbox One than it does on the Nintendo Switch. So if you're a multi-platform owner and you don't care about handheld play, I would probably check out the game on the PS4, the Xbox One, or even the PC. If you're only a Nintendo Switch owner, I still think it's a good game, but it definitely has some flaws. If you're a huge fan of action-adventure games in this style, or really hardcore into the Darksiders universe like Nintendo is, you will probably be happy with your purchase of Darksiders Genesis. For everyone else though, I would probably wait for a sale, as these games do tend to be marked down pretty quickly. Now, a few patches could iron out these issues and make this game play a lot better, but as it stands, Darksiders Genesis on the Nintendo Switch is a fun but pretty flawed game. Alright, so those are my thoughts on Darksiders Genesis for the Nintendo Switch. Now, I did enjoy my time with the game, but I felt like I would have enjoyed the game more if these technical issues were ironed out and it was easier to drop in and drop out of other people's games, and the map system just absolutely terrible. But overall, Darksiders Genesis is a fun game, just know that there are some flaws going into it. So be sure to let me know in the comments section down below if you have played Darksiders Genesis, if you plan on picking it up, if so, what system you're going to pick it up on for, or if you're going to wait for a sale, or if you just don't care about Darksiders Genesis at all. And as always guys, thank you for checking out this video. Now like I said at the start, if you are new to the channel and you like stuff like video game news and reviews and crap like that, which I'm sure you do and that's why you're here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications and check out other videos on the channel, as we're always talking about the latest and greatest in the world of video games, with an emphasis on Nintendo Switch and retro stuff. And if you are a longtime viewer of the channel, as always, I will catch you guys on the next video. Later.